All right, woo! All right, everybody, my name is Jerri Dawn, and I am an alcoholic. I'm going to step just a little this way. I've been sober since March 28 of 2008, and for that period of time, I am extremely grateful. Yeah. And I have a home group. The name of my home group is Whiskey and Milk. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right, Jim. We're a women's group, and we meet on Tuesdays at 5:30 on Zoom, and then we meet in person on Thursdays at Northwest 50th and Meridian in Oklahoma City. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for inviting me to come here. Thank you for allowing me to see your beautiful venue and what y'all are starting here. I do get the privilege of being a part of Citywide in Oklahoma City, and I've been on that committee somewhere around six, almost 7 years, and it's been going on for 9 years. And it's a beautiful thing and an opportunity to bring us together, right? To bring us together that are in recovery. And I applaud y'all for what you're doing. So my husband drove me up here, and I'm very grateful that what he often tells me, he says, I try to tell him, honey, you don't have to go because, I go places. And anyway, and he's like, no, he said, I want to be your arm candy everywhere you go. So there's my arm candy. And I'm so grateful to have him in my life. And then my good buddy Charles, I was just talking to him on the phone earlier, and I said something about coming up here. He was like, wait, what? That's today? He was in Oklahoma City, and he was like, I'm going to come up there. I was like, I don't expect you to do that. And I just sent him the deal, and he drove all the way up here, and he's on the Citywide committee in Oklahoma City also. And so he came up here to support us too. So, all right, I'm supposed to be up here, and I'm supposed to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. The thing of it is that when we get to the part about what happened, it's really hard for me to talk about what happened because I didn't have anything to do with it. Yeah, it's like something happened, but it wasn't of me, of how I magically got sober. You know what I mean? That was some power greater than myself that got me sober because I didn't do that. So it's always an interesting part to try to talk about in our story. But I'm going to do the best that I can to tell you what it was like. I grew up in a very good home. I have a great home, and if you can't tell, some people can, some people can't, depending on where I'm at. I've got a little bit of an accent. I'm definitely a country girl. I grew up in the country on a dead-end road in Oklahoma. I've always lived in Oklahoma, and I have great parents. My parents are still married to this day. They've been married almost 53 years, and I have an older brother who's 7 years older than me, and he's absolutely nothing like me. My older brother was the kid that always never got into trouble. My mom would do the laundry, put it on the bed, and my brother would walk right in behind her and go put the clothes up. You know what I mean? Like, he was the kid that came home, he did his homework, he's just a good kid. And my parents have never told me this, so you know how we're delusional. And so I like to think about, how they were doing so great with this little boy, and he was such a delight, right? They thought, we are such good parents. We're going to do it again. Then they had me, and so we'll get to that. Like I said, my name's Jerri Dawn. My dad's name's Jerri Dawn. I am his little girl, 100%. And I have parents that absolutely love me. And the reason why I often talk about, that I grew up in a really great home, I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's not everybody's story. Some people come here and they come from broken homes, or they come from abuse, or they come from alcoholism, or they come from abandonment, all those things. That is not in my story. And the reason why I always talk about this is not to say that I'm different or anything like that. It's because I know that alcoholism does not discriminate. But the other thing that I know is that alcoholism cannot be parented out of a child. I have amazing parents. It's not because they didn't do what they should have done as parents that I'm an alcoholic. So anyway, and so my dad was just a great big old guy, like 6'2", 250 pounds, and he was a principal and a coach. And during the summer, he worked for the sheriff's department. You know what I mean? The only thing my dad wasn't was a preacher. He covered all the bases. And he was also a cowboy. And we had horses when I was growing up. And, I was that little girl. I never wanted to be in the house. I always wanted to be outside. I want to be outside. I want to be riding the horses. I was the girl that was outside climbing up on top of the chicken coop and then on top of the barn. And they'd catch me. I'd be like 6 years old, and I'm dancing on top of the barn. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know. I just had random ideas like that and it was just like, even from a really young age, I just always wanted to change my perception. You know what I mean? If I could just get a little higher, you know what I mean? Just a little higher than everybody else. And so I went to a bunch of different schools because my dad was a principal and he changed schools, but we always lived on that dead-end road outside of Amber, and that was home. But I can remember being 9 years old and sneaking out my window and sitting there and looking up at all the stars, because when you live in the country, you see all the stars. And I would look up at the sky, and I would look around on that dead-end road, and I think, is this it? Is this all there is? And I'm a little girl. Like, I've got no reason, nothing going on in my life that would make me, but there was something inside me. And what I know today is that my alcoholism is a spiritual disease. And I'm going to say that differently. My alcoholism is a spiritual dis-ease. I do not feel comfortable in my own skin, right? And that's not an outside job. To fix that does not come from the outside. It doesn't come from, the best man, the best job, that will not fix this. And maybe you've heard that said before, we come in here and we've got this God-sized hole. And the only thing that's going to fill it is that relationship with God. So when I know that my alcoholism stems from this place of spiritual dis-ease, that's where my restlessness, irritable, and discontentedness comes from. And I had that far before I ever took a drink. Far before I ever took a drink. I'm that little girl that was running around and getting into trouble, just not getting caught. I was real good, and my dad put enough fear of God in me to, because I'd get whoopings, and I deserved every last one of them. Don't think I didn't. So I thought, if I want to do what I want to do, but I don't want to get caught. Like, don't be stupid enough to get caught. You know what I mean? That was my whole master plan. I thought it was my dad told me from a young age that, he told me one time we were watching these movies, and we were watching these movies, and I was, these criminals, you watch them criminal movies, and I remember telling my dad, and I was like, Dad, why did that guy do that? If he would have done this, he wouldn't have got caught, right? Here's my dad who works for the sheriff's department. He's like, you have a criminal mind, right? Like, it's a little scary. And my dad's a smoker, and my dad always had a Zippo. That is the best smelling thing in the world. I don't know about you, but I'm that little girl he'd find by the couch just going, I'm just sniffing the lighter fluid. He's like, here, stop it. I was pretty high strung. I was a pretty high strung kid. Anyway, but I was a good student, and I'm going to get to my drinking. I was 9 years old the first time I ever had a drink of alcohol. But like I said, my dad taught at different schools every few years. We would go to different schools. And I remember I had a very sensitive response the first time they made me change schools. And I cried, and my parents told me exactly what they should have said. My parents told me, they said, it's okay, you're going to find new friends. That's a very natural thing to tell a child. But what I know today is, after doing my fifth step, right, is I twisted what they said, and what happened was I heard people are replaceable. Not only replaceable, dispensable. And I wouldn't know that till much later, till coming in these rooms and walking through a fifth step and looking at how I had used and abused many people, and then threw them off to the side when they didn't facilitate what I needed, right? I did that a lot, and there was a lot of harm that I did and a lot of amends that had to be made. So anyway, I was 9 years old, and I was in a little town called Cement, and it was me and another blonde-headed little girl. We were just best friends, and I had this master plan that my dad would give me money, and he did, and we were going to go to the only little gas station in this little bitty town, and we were going to go in there and buy candy. And at that time, you could buy you could buy candy, just loose candy, and they put it in brown paper bags, right? Get where I'm going with this? I see you alcoholics, you're like, yep, brown paper bag. Because once you get your candy in a brown paper bag, you can't tell what's in it. So here's my master plan at 9 years old. I get my candy, we do that, we go walking around to the back to the coolers. And we start putting bottles in our brown paper bags. And we walk out. And I didn't get caught. There were no consequences, 0 consequences from that. But there is a sign there. I started out in brown paper bags. So I don't know if you can read into that. I certainly didn't at 9 years old. But this was also the only time in my life that I ever drank like a lady, was at 9 years old. I didn't become a daily drinker, but what I drank was wine coolers. And if I'd known I'd be telling this story over and over and over again, I would have picked something a lot more hardcore. but you tell me I have to tell the truth, so that's the truth. And what happened for me in that instance is, I felt the effects of alcohol. I felt the effect of alcohol, and what I can tell you is this, is that it was warm and it was good. And my whole life, all the way up to 9 years old, I've been told that alcohol's bad, drugs are bad, these things are bad, don't do those things. And when I did it, I thought, wow, nothing bad happened. Matter of fact, the opposite. And so I didn't become a daily drinker, as most people don't at 9 years old. But from that point on, what I did do is I began to hang out with kids that their parents didn't watch them as well as my parents watched me. I don't know if you've ever done that. You start hanging out with the older kids. And so I started doing that. And when I could hang out with those older kids and do those things and their parents weren't home, that's when you get to hang out and you get to play spin the bottle and you get to drink the alcohol the parents left there because they're at the bar. You start kissing boys, you start doing things like that. And I started doing all those things, and I was just having a great time. I was having a great time because when nobody was looking, that's what I was doing, but when everybody was looking, I was a straight A student, I was a starter on the basketball team, I was on a national championship dance team, and I'm Mr. Crawford's daughter. You know what I mean? Like, I'm that girl when everybody's looking, but when nobody's looking, I'm doing all these other things. I'm living a double life at a young age. So what happened for me was this: at 13 years old, I got myself in a whole bunch of trouble that I couldn't get out of. The reason why I tell this part of my story, and I always tell this part of my story because without fail, every time I tell it, somebody after the meeting comes up to me, and sometimes they can't even say the words out loud. Sometimes they just look at me with tears in their eyes, and I know immediately, me too, right? Like, that's what I hear. And so I was 13 years old, and what had happened was I had gotten pregnant at 13 years old. And I remember having, and this part of my story is not what makes me an alcoholic, but I'll tell you this part of my story is what severed the idea that a person like me could have a relationship with God. All right? This is not what makes me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is the effect that alcohol has on me once I begin to drink, that I cannot control the amount that I take. And when I stop drinking, I cannot stay stopped. That's what makes me an alcoholic. But this part of my story is what severed the idea that I could have a relationship with God. So I'm 13 years old, and I have to tell my dad because it's time. I don't know any way out of this. And I sit my dad down, and my dad is a wonderful man. And I sit my dad down, and I said, Dad, I'm pregnant. And I'll never forget the look on my dad's face because I'm just his little girl, And my dad looks at me, and he says, you're not going to have a baby at 13 years old. And I knew what he meant without saying it. Right? And I wasn't raised religious, but I was raised with a belief in God, right? And I remember looking at my dad, and I said, but Dad, I don't want to go to hell. And that man looked at me, and he said, I will go to hell for you. So, when we come in here and we say things like, I'm not hurting nobody but myself, I can tell you 100% that is not true for me. That is not true for me. And maybe there's some men in here and you've got a little girl. And the idea that you would go to that extreme for your little girl, that's how my daddy is about me. And I did not have a baby at 13 years old. And if there's any women in here that need to talk about that afterwards, please see me after the meeting, because there is step work and there is ways to get to have healing from that, because I've gone through that. So know that you're not alone. Anyway, and so after that point, now it doesn't matter. Remember I told you, I was the good girl when everybody was looking. Now it no longer matters because I'm going to hell already, don't you know? What does it matter? And now I'm beginning to drink and I'm beginning to run away. And every time I go drink, you see, the drink is the thing that makes me not feel so empty. It makes me not feel so empty, right? It numbs all of that that's going on within me, all the shame, all the guilt, all the horror that I feel within myself. At a very young age, and many alcoholics who walk in this room, because I've spoken to many of you, you know that deal, that thing that you lay down with at night, before you've done amends, before you've done your step work, and you lay down at night and the voices are just going in your head of all the things that you did, all the regrets that you have, all the things you wish you hadn't done. You know that dark place, and you can't get it to stop. I was already hearing that at this very young age, and so I was doing everything I could to chase that away. And somewhere in that chasing it away, I crossed that invisible line of being a hard drinker to turning into an alcoholic. And that's what happened for me. And so it became more important than anything else. It became more important than what my parents thought about me. It became more important than school. It became more important than my brother. It became more important than anything. And I began to run away. And at 15 years old, I ran away, and I went to 4 states in 9 days. And my parents, again, would come get me. They just did this again and again, and they put me in my first treatment center when I was 15 years old. And I went to that treatment center, and all I can tell you is I wasn't ready. I don't know if anybody here has ever been to rehab and you're not ready. I still didn't think I had a problem. I was pretty sure that everybody else had overreacted, and it wasn't that bad. You know what I mean? It's just not that bad. I don't belong here. I'll also mention this. It was a treatment center, but it was also / psychiatric ward, and I was pretty sure I didn't belong there. And so there was a girl there that purred like a cat. One of these days, I fear I'll see her in these rooms. God love her. Anyway. So I was in there, and they diagnosed me. You know, I sat down with the psychologist, and I don't know if you're like me, but I have a hard time telling those people the truth. Our big book really talks about that too. Like, you know what I mean? Our wives, friends, children, you know, all them, they find us very hard and inapproachable. So do the psychologists and the doctors, because I don't tell you the truth. There's 2 reasons I don't tell you the truth. Number 1, I don't know the truth. I'm so delusional, right? Like, I believe my own stuff, my own lies, number 1. Number 2, I don't trust you. I don't trust you at all, because I look at your fancy, smancy certificates up there on that wall, and I see your nice clothes and that you're going to go off somewhere with your nice family. You've never been where I've been, and why in the world would I tell you what I've done? And so I don't tell them the truth. And when you do that enough, you know, we're pretty convincing. We look crazy, right? And so they give you crazy pills. That's what happened. That's what happened to me, anyway. And so then I've got an excuse, don't you know? You can't expect anything out of me because I'm crazy. I'm not an alcoholic, I'm just crazy. And here's these nice little pills. Those pills did not keep me sober, not at all. I ran away, again, whatever. Long story short, I graduated high school. I still graduated high school because, like I told you, my dad was in education. He was a principal, and he's 6'2" and 250 pounds. And my dad told me that I would not get to move out of the house until I graduated high school, period. That was not going to happen. It didn't matter where I went. He was going to come get me, and he was going to bring me back, that I would graduate high school. But he said, but once you graduate high school, you can move out of this house. So at 16 years old, I graduated high school. I finished my senior year in 2 weeks. Like, you know, we're not stupid people. You know what I mean? That's like, you getting in between me and my drinking and what I want to do, I'll get it done. And I did. And my dad, being a man of his word, right, because he's just such an honorable person, you know, he was going to honor that. And it just so happened that the stars had aligned. Everything was in perfect order and timing, because I graduated 2 weeks early. I'm 16 years old, and my forever man, anybody ever have one of those? Anyway, maybe just me. At 16, I'm pretty sure it's going to be forever, you know? I mean, he had just got released from prison, you know? It was like, how much better could it get, you know? And he was old enough to buy me alcohol. So my dad watches his little girl leave the house at 16 years old and take off down from that dead-end road with a man who just got released from prison. And I had arrived, don't you know, because Daddy's not on my back anymore, and I don't have a problem working. Alcohol, you know, when we show up to work, we're hard workers. When we show up, right? I used to pride myself for a very long time about how I've never been fired from a job. You have to show back up to get fired. Anyway, and so I worked, and he didn't, but he could buy alcohol, so I tolerated him. We were super toxic, and you know, the thing that happens to me, and the love that I have for alcohol, it's like, you know, that whole it didn't matter what I had to do. You know, I would go to work every day, and I would come home, and as long as he had my alcohol there for me, everything was going to be okay. And, you know, I'm going to be honest with you. My story has a whole lot of outside issues. There's a whole lot of chemicals in my story. But alcohol was always my best friend, because it did not matter what I put into my body, and I like to go really fast, by the way, and that I could pour alcohol on top of it, especially when I'm coming off of those things, and it made it better. Alcohol was always right there. It was my magic elixir, you know? And so he would get me that alcohol, and we were very toxic. And when I drink, I think I can fight. Typically the men that I'm with, you know, and so that's how that relationship went down. And it was so toxic that I married him. I married him at 18, and I divorced him at 19. You know what I mean? I didn't even change my last name, so I like to tell people it didn't count. But, you know, and I got out of that relationship, and I got into a relationship with another guy who has a DOC number. That's very attractive to me if you've been to prison. My husband likes to tell people he's overly qualified because he did state time and fed time, so he likes to tell people he has. It is pretty hot. Anyway, and so... So anyway, you know, man, I wish I could just lump this all together and just, because it is what it is. But my alcoholism progresses and progresses, and I get in a relationship with a guy, and I'm already doing those accelerants. That's what I'll call it, a whole lot of accelerants. And I'm beginning to do things that I said I would never do, right? I would look at those other people and be like, okay, I'll do it like this, but I would never do that. And then I did it. And then I did it. And I got in this relationship, and I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people, go big or go home, right? If you're going to do it all. Well, it's the same way with this. It was like, why buy it when you can sell it? Why sell it when you can cook it? And I went on a great relationship of doing that for a while. And so I was in the manufacturing business, is what it says on my resume. Anyway. Just kidding. I don't put that on the resume. Anyway. And so I was with him, and you know, just the insanity. But this is what happened. I got pregnant, and if you are an alcoholic mother, and you've ever been pregnant in the throes of your alcoholism, the things that we do in the dark are extremely shameful. Because I have a baby that's growing inside me, and I can't stop. Okay? Utterly powerless. My alcoholism progresses. I do have 3 beautiful children. But that man got busted one night, and he just so happened, God intervened, and I didn't know that God had intervened, but he did. Because I was always with him. We were always doing that together. And on this night, there was something in me, and I remember telling him, don't go. I didn't even know I was pregnant yet, by the way. And I told him, I said, don't go. Something's wrong, don't go. And he said, you just need some sleep. I'll see you in the morning. And he got busted that night. And I was not with him. Thank God. But I'll tell you this, that we were doing so much. That man was the second man in Grady County to ever have $1 million bond put on his head. And my son is now 23 years old, and his dad is still in prison. So God intervened, right? God definitely intervened. And so what happened was that, you know, after he gets locked up, I find out I'm pregnant. I can't stop. I don't even want to acknowledge that I'm pregnant, because if I'm pregnant, that means I've got to do something different. And I can't stop in the place that I'm at and what I'm doing, and I eventually go out to my parents' house because I know it's the only place that I can be at long enough to try to stay sober enough to give birth to a healthy baby. And that did happen by the grace of God. Like I said, you know, my alcoholism progresses and progresses, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I have a daughter, and with my daughter, I said, okay, well, I'm not going to do these things, but drinking's fine. You know, drinking's fine, just don't drink the hard stuff, right? So I'm drinking beer, you know, and I'm telling myself it's okay because I'm not doing those other things. And I give birth to a healthy little girl. And with my last pregnancy, I was in a relationship with a guy, and at this time, I am doing those accelerants daily, and I'm drinking a 5th of Kentucky Deluxe every single day. Like I told you from the beginning, I have never drank like a lady, except for that one time with those wine coolers. And so I've never owned a wine glass. I've never done mixed drinks. There's a lot of drinkers out here that are far more experienced than I am of all the different kinds. I am the person that wanted to go to the cheapest, the strongest, let's get it done. You know what I mean? I'm drinking it for the effect. Let's not get this twisted. I'm not one of those that's fancy about it. I'm drinking for the effect, and if it doesn't produce that effect quick enough and cheap enough and fast enough, we're drinking the wrong stuff. That's how I drink. And so, and I'm also the girl that once I take the top off that bottle, it's not going back on. Might as well throw it away. And I don't save stuff. I'm not a saver. I know there are people that are. There's people that can save alcohol, they can hide alcohol, and I wish I could have been that. I wasn't. If I was awake, and I was always awake because I did accelerants, and so I drank all the alcohol, and that's what I did. I drank. And so anyway, I was doing this daily, and I'm the person that was putting needles in my arm, and I'm drinking whiskey every single day. And I get pregnant with my son, and I can't stop. There's a line in our big book, and it says, the utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. I know that in a guttural level, because I hated myself. And you see, before all this had happened, I went to treatment my very first time when I was 19 years old. My second time. Yeah, my second time when I was 19 years old. And that was my first time to ever get introduced to AA. And when I got out of that treatment center when I was 19 years old, I went to AA, and I was told that I needed to get a sponsor, and I got a sponsor. I was told I needed to call my sponsor. I didn't. And I was told that I needed to read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought we just read it in a meeting. Why would I read it again? They told me to pray on my knees in the morning and at night, and I thought, that's none of your business how I pray. God can hear me wherever I am, as if I had a relationship with God. You know what I mean? I had all these things going on in my head. I was so not surrendered at all. Not at all. And so when this happened with my youngest, like I told you, I'm drinking whiskey and I'm doing those other things on a daily basis, and I cannot stop, and I hate myself. And the pit that's in my stomach, I'm drinking this alcohol, and I'll look at that bottle, and this is really the only time in my entire life that I would say to myself, just have one. You see, I'm the chick that, like I told you before, go big or go home. If you're going to do it all, right? I used to take pride in how much I could drink. Anybody else take pride in how much they could drink? Yeah, there you go. I think I can drink grown men under the table. I took pride in how long I could stay awake without seeing shadow people. You know what I mean? Like there was very bizarre things to be proud of. And when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous, I find out I was taking so much pride in something I had absolutely no control over. I had absolutely no control over that. So anyway, I'm doing this, and I'm pregnant with my son, and I'm looking at this bottle. It's the only time I'm telling myself, just take a few, and I can't stop. And every time I finish that bottle of whiskey, every time, and I hate myself. And that phenomenon of craving that we suffer from, that it becomes more important than anything else. Even the unborn child that I love. And it's not that I don't love my children. I love my children. Some people on the outside, they look and they say, why can't you get sober for your kids? Why would you do that? Why would you do that to your parents? They're such great people, right? We hear that in the book. We hear it from other people. We hear all those things. And the truth of the matter is that I do love all of them. I love them so much. But you know what? This disease is far more powerful than a mother's love. It is far more powerful than the love of my parents. I am beyond human aid. I am beyond human aid. And what happens is that I go, I know that I'm supposed to be sober at least 30 days before having this baby. If you've ever done like I did, you know what that means. Because if you go to the hospital and have a baby with those things in your system, they will take your kids. Well, I went into labor early, and I was actually at the hospital. My mom was at the hospital with her dying mother, who had just had a heart attack. And I was in the emergency room with my oldest, Jerri, and he had strep throat. And I didn't want to take him to the hospital, by the way. I don't want to forget that. I don't know if any moms in here ever walked in, but I know that I certainly did. I walked in or I don't know if I walked in, but maybe just out there, I used to tell myself, you're not a bad mom. They have a roof over their head. They have food. They go to school. You're not a bad mom. It's okay. But I'm also the mom that stayed locked up in her bedroom while my kids are beating on the door outside asking me when I'm going to come out. I'm also the mom that would take a cereal box and hand it to my kids and set them in front of the TV and just let them fend for themselves. I'm also the mom that brought random people over all the time. I'm also the mom that drove drunk with my kids in the car and would wake up in the middle of a blackout talking to people. I've driven an hour away and have no recollection how I got there, and I look down and see my kids. You know, I'm that mom. And so when I was at the hospital with Jeffrey, and I didn't want to take him because, again, I'd been drinking, but I finally did, and they said he had strep throat. I'm at the hospital, and it's about 3 to 4 weeks early, and I have my first contraction. And you see, I don't have long labors. I have very quick labors. And I look down at my little boy because, you know, it hurts. I don't have these little ones that it comes all at once. And my 7-year-old little boy looks up to me and he goes, "Mommy, what's wrong?" And I know that I was very mean to him in that moment because I was so afraid, because I knew what was happening and it couldn't happen. It just can't happen now. And I told him, "Get in the car, we're leaving." And he was like, "Mommy, are you okay?" And I said, "Just get in the car, we're leaving." And I put my little boy in the car, and I drive back out to the country to this broken down trailer that I'm living in at this point on a dead-end road. And it's 15 miles from where I was at that hospital back out to that trailer house. And I'm timing my contractions the entire way. And I walk into the house, and the guy that I was with, I tell him, you know, I send my son off to bed, and my daughter's in bed, and I tell him that I'm pretty sure that I'm in labor, and he doesn't know what that's about. He's never had a child before, and he doesn't know what to do. And so I laid down, and I'm in labor. And I'll tell you this, I said the Lord's Prayer again and again and again because I was in labor for 4 hours, which is pretty quick labor, but still 4 hours in that trailer house saying the Lord's Prayer, because I know I can't give birth to this baby at the hospital. And I give birth to my little boy in that trailer house. And so what I can tell you is this, is that God showed up in that broken down trailer house on that dead end road for a dope shooting whiskey drinker and a beautiful innocent baby, because that little boy was born healthy. That is by the grace of God. And he only weighed 5 pounds. And I knew when he let out that cry that he was okay. And there's something inside us, and I don't know, I don't understand it, I just know that God put it there. And when a mama hears her babies cry, that big cry, that first noise that they make, you know that they're okay. And by the grace of God, he was okay. And I didn't know what to do then, but I knew that I needed formula, and I couldn't nurse him because I had drugs and alcohol in my system. So what I did was this. I called my dad, like I always do. I called my dad, and my dad, I told you he was a cowboy, but he grew up in a family that all the children were born at home. So this wasn't unusual for him. I don't know how your dad would have responded, but how my dad responded, I've come to find out, is a little odd. And so I called my dad, and I said, "Dad, I just gave birth to the baby." And you know, you would think most dads would be like, What? Anyway, and he was like, "Well, do you want me to come cut the cord?" You know what I mean? Just completely unfazed. Like, this is what we do. You know what I mean? The birds and the bees. And so I was like, "No, Dad, I don't. I need formula. Can you go get me some formula?" So what my dad does is he calls my mom, who's at the hospital with her dying mother. And he says, "Susan, Dawn had the baby. You better get home and bring her some formula for the baby." My mom rushes down to the nursery at that hospital on that same floor. And as she's rushing down there, she falls face first. I didn't know this till many years later, because she's reacting as most people would. Dawn just gave birth to a baby in a trailer. She's a little freaked out. And she jumps up and she tells the nurses at the nurse's station, "My daughter just gave birth to her baby in a trailer. I need formula." So I don't know if you follow this, but my plan was to stay home and not let anybody know until both of our systems are clean. God had a better plan. And so the authorities found out. And so it was highly requested that I get up there with that baby, and I did. And what happened was exactly what should have happened. I tested positive, and so did my son, for alcohol and drugs. And DHS stepped in, and my mom and my dad were in the room too with me when they brought in the caseworkers and the nurses, and they said, "We want to know where your other 2 children are. We are removing them from your custody." And I was broken. And that was on February the 3rd of 2008. I did not get sober right away. I drank for the next 2 months. But I'll tell you this, they allowed me to stay in that hospital for 3 days with my 5-pound little baby while they observed him. And I would go down in the parking lot and I would drink whiskey and I would go back up and I would sit with my baby. I am beyond human aid. And so after that, what happened was I drank, and how I drink is this, I hate everyone at this point. I hate DHS, I hate the nurses, I hate that man I'm with, I hate everybody, but mostly I hate myself. And I'm drinking to oblivion, and I'm tearing up this trailer house. And it was on March 27th of 2008. By this time, I have no job. I can't go to my parents' house because by the grace of God, they were allowed to take my children in temporarily. And I couldn't go to their house, and I didn't have a job, and the man that I was with was in drug court, and they were tired of him and fixing to send him to prison. And he was the last bit of money I had. And I took him to the courthouse, and I had enough money to go buy a 5th of Kentucky Deluxe. And I don't ever want to forget that. That was my last 5th of Kentucky Deluxe to this day. But again, I'll tell you, I'm not a saver, I'm a doer. And I went home and I drank every bit of that whiskey. And I'm so grateful that I did, because when I woke up on March 28th of 2008, I was broken to depths I had never known before. I was broken to it because I was completely alone. I was completely alone and I was devastated. And so when I tell you, it's hard for me to tell you what happened, why that was the moment that I was like willing to do whatever it took. That was not of me. Right? There was this window, this opportunity, whatever it was, in that darkness, my God found a way to get to me. All the way on that broken down trailer in that dead end road. And I woke up and I was sick. And I remembered Alcoholics Anonymous, and I came to the AA meeting that I hadn't been to in almost 10 years. And so I show up, and the meeting's still in the same place, and I walk in, and there's people there that remember me from almost 10 years ago. And they're telling me things like, "We're so glad to see you." They remember my name. They're telling me things like, "Welcome home. Keep coming back." And you see, there was no one in my life telling me that at this time. Absolutely no one. And so I kept coming back. And for 34 days, I went to 2 meetings a day. And I am the girl that had to drive past the liquor store like this, because if I looked at it, I was going to pull into it. There were certain parts of town I couldn't even let my headlights point towards. You know what I mean? And I am just white-knuckling it for that 34 days. I am. That's the truth. And the state of Oklahoma says I have to go to long-term treatment. I thought that it was kind of ridiculous at the time, you know what I mean? Because I had 34 days sober, don't you know? And so I thought I had something figured out. They were not impressed. And so I went to a long-term treatment center in McAlester, Oklahoma, that allowed women and children. It's the only reason I went to that one, because I thought I could get my kids back while I was in rehab. But they didn't allow me to have my kids back while I was in rehab, thank God. I didn't think that at the time. Do you know so much? You know, life is lived forward but seen backwards, and I've heard that said. Life is lived forward but seen backward. And I didn't know it at the time. Man, I would sit in that treatment center for that 3 months that I was there. And I'll tell you this, if I would have had my children while I was in that treatment center, I don't know if you've ever been to one like that, but to have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a newborn baby in one little hospital room when you're newly sober, Sounds like hell all in itself. You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't, I don't know that I would have made it. I don't know that I would have made it. But what I did do was I read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous from cover to cover. And I can tell you this, that big book 12-stepped me. See, I didn't have anybody telling me, only read this and then we'll talk about it. Then read this and we'll talk about it. I was in rehab for 3 months and did not want to be there. And I had never read the big book. And I read it from cover to cover. When I'm telling you that I read the stories in the back of the book, and I think it was so important for me because for so long I thought I'm an alcoholic and or I'm not even an alcoholic, I'm just the and I don't belong here, I'm different. But what happened in reading that big book was I found that I do belong here. I absolutely do belong here, and that I can't do it by myself after I got done reading that book. And I started praying on my knees in the morning and at night when I was in that treatment center. If you've ever been in one of those state-funded treatment centers, the floors aren't fancy. You know what I mean? But I got on my knees. And I'm praying to a mattress because I don't know that God's going to hear me anyway because I'm still that girl in my mind that I'm going to hell. But you tell me this is the only way that I can stay sober. And I began to pray. And I got out of that treatment center, and I got a sponsor, and I started hanging out with these old-timers at that group, and they asked me a very, very, very important question. They said, do you have a sponsor? And I responded with, kind of. That's the wrong answer. I don't know if you know that, but that's the wrong answer. And they were quick to let me know that was the wrong answer. And so they took me to another town because there weren't a lot of women there that were sponsoring at that time, or there weren't that we knew of. And so they took me to another town, and I got a sponsor there and started working the steps with her. Unfortunately, she relapsed. And there was this wonderful old-timer, and he was really, you know, looking at it now, he really wasn't an old-timer, but when you're new, 4 years is an old-timer. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're new, that's impressive. And I called him, and I was on my 4-step, and I needed to do my 5th step. And what he told me was this, because the lady who was sponsoring me had relapsed. And he knew I was at a jumping off place, that if I didn't move forward, I would go back out. And he told me, he said, this is what we're going to do. He said, you're going to bring your 4-step over to my house, and you're going to do your 5th step. Now, I know there may be some people that don't agree with that, but I'm going to tell you something. God showed up. Because if that man wouldn't have done that, you would have a different speaker tonight. And I said every bit of that. All the things that I said I would never say out loud, I finally said. All the things that I knew were all these things that were going to send me to hell. And you know, I'm that person that you might know something, and you might know something, but not one person knows everything. And this person's hearing everything. Everything. And there were times in reading that 5th step that I can't even look at him. I can't even look up. And he's hearing all of it. And we get done with that 5th step, and there were a few things that he said to me. And one of them that he said was, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's no longer a theory. See, because before that, I hadn't really taken any action. 1, 2, and 3, 3 is just about making this decision. But in a 4 and a 5, I started taking some action. And he told me, now you're going to start sponsoring other women. He said, there's a huge need here for women to take other women through this work, and you're going to start sponsoring. And the last thing that he told me, and I don't even know that he realized the impact that it would have in my life from that moment on, but God showed up in this moment. He looked at me and he told me, he said, I love you. And why that was so important was I was so sure that I couldn't be loved, right? I'm the girl that's going to hell from the time I was 13 years old. And here's another human being who has heard all of me and can love me. How much greater is this God y'all talk about? And I began to have this spiritual awakening. And so from that moment on, I was on fire for Alcoholics Anonymous. There's never been a time in my sobriety that I've not been sponsoring multiple people. Since I was 6 months sober, I've always been sponsoring multiple people in sobriety. There's never been a time I have not. I got to walk through this process of making these amends to my parents who I had hurt again and again and again. And there's something to be said, and sometimes you might hear it said, this deal about these living amends, right? I'll tell you this. I believe that living amends is what you do after the formal amends. Because for a person like me, I need to own up to I was wrong, not I'm sorry. Everybody's heard that enough from me, but that I was wrong, and what was I wrong for? And when I met with my parents and I sat down with my parents and I told them I was wrong for not being the daughter that they deserved. I was wrong for making them worry all those years, for continuously having to bail me out, to stress about me, to worry about me, that I was wrong for putting their grandkids' lives in danger. And let me tell you something, the really hard part about that is that when we're making these amends, we don't get to make an excuse for our behavior by saying I was drinking. Because if I say it like that, guess what? I'm just telling you, once I drink, I'll do it again. That's not an amends. And then the second thing that's really difficult to do is shut up. Because they have something to say. And I don't get to interrupt that. And I didn't. Now, all my dad did, because he's not an emotional kind of guy. You know what I mean? He's a big old tough cowboy. He just looked at me and he just said, you just keep doing what you're doing. And got up and walked off because he didn't want to cry. My mom, on the other hand, had a lot to say. And she needed to. And she told me that she used to write letters every day and tape them to the back door of their house. Letters to me because she didn't know where I was. Just hoping that if I showed up, that letter would reach me. I got my kids back, and the beautiful thing about that was I got my children back, and I'll tell you something, I had never, not once ever, been a sober mother. Not ever. And I was about 10 months sober, and I got trial reunification back with my children. And I had no idea how to be a sober mom. Alcoholics Anonymous didn't just teach me how to stop drinking. That's not it, right? Here I am, and I'm trying to build this relationship with my home group and with God and with my sponsor and walk through these steps and make these things right. And I get handed these kids, and oftentimes I'm calling others. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. You ever been that way? That's the most powerful thing I've ever said in Alcoholics Anonymous, and still to this day, is for me to be like, I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do now? That's the most important thing I could ever say in Alcoholics Anonymous, because the most dangerous thing I can say in Alcoholics Anonymous, no matter how many years I have sober, is, I got this. I know. You ever sponsor anybody like that? It's like, I know. Oh, do you? How about you start saying, I'm learning, because your actions aren't showing it. So anyway, golly. So I get these beautiful kids back, and I have to make amends to these babies who don't understand yet what that means. And that little boy, my oldest one, he went through the most. And when he came to the rooms with me, because that's what you do when you're a single mom, you bring them with you. You see, my son was such a nervous mess, he used to chew on his shirt all the time. Whether it was the sleeve or his collar, and he would just chew on it and slobber. He got teased at school because he was just such an anxious kid. He was so scared all the time. My daughter was so emotionally detached that you couldn't comfort her. You had to just take her and put her in her crib and walk away. And that's what she wanted, was to be left alone, because she had had no nurturing as a baby. And then here's this little boy, my little baby, and he is quickly making up for being a 5-pound baby. If you were to see him now, he looks like a grown man, and he's only 16. So I've been blessed with learning how to be a mom with these guys, and I've made plenty of mistakes. I've made lots of mistakes in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've made lots of mistakes in sponsorship. By the way, there's no such thing as a perfect sponsor. That doesn't exist. If a person is not willing, you cannot sponsor them. You cannot sponsor somebody who's not willing and who's not surrendered. That's impossible. Because you see, you can get the best sponsor in the whole wide world. Bill Wilson could rise from his grave. And if you're not surrendered, it's not going to work. Right? It's not going to work. And so, like I said, I've made lots of mistakes trying to sponsor people that aren't surrendered, because I'm going to beat it into you, don't you know? You know what I mean? Like you're going to have to do it this way or die. That kind of sponsorship doesn't work well. I found out the hard way. And then I got married. And I'm going to say just a little bit about this. And my oldest, I want to say this about my kids, and I'll wrap it up with my arm candy. My oldest one today, he graduated high school, and he is currently, he moved out of the house when he graduated high school. And he has been a wonderful man with a kind heart, right? He has a job and he takes care of himself, and it's a beautiful thing because, my amends with my parents, I call my parents every day, Monday through Friday on the way to work, and I call them on a landline because they're old, and they both answer the phone at the same time, and then they get frustrated. You hear the other one, whoever says hello first, the other one's like, ugh, because that means that one got to talk to me first. And recently, this is new and exciting, they figured out how to put it on speaker. They're so excited. They're like, hold on, we're going to put you on speaker. And so, when they do that, it's just a beautiful thing because, I was talking about my oldest. So my oldest, Jerri, he lives out of town, and he works, and he takes care of himself. But every day that he works, and I don't know where he got this. He wasn't in the, I don't know. I guess watching me, really. That's what happens. He watched me. Every day that he goes into work, without fail, he's calling me around 10:30. However, it's extremely inconvenient because I'm at work, but it's okay. I answer the phone, right? And he calls me, and he's like, hey, Mom, what's going on? Just to check in and say hi. I have a daughter who is unbelievably intelligent and absolutely nothing like me. I always thought she was nothing like me, ever. She was so odd. Right? She didn't get in trouble like me. She didn't run around with boys like me. She didn't all the things. I was like, she's so weird. And so smart. Oh. And then she went to college, and I don't know what happened there. I think they brainwashed her. And then when she was 19 years old, she met a guy, and she moved to Connecticut. That's kind of like me. I was like, what? I'd never even met him. Still haven't met him. And my daughter lives in Connecticut now. She's been there for over a year. And that little boy who's 16 years old, and man, I know I need to shut up. I'm sorry, guys. My little boy who is 16 years old now, I'll tell this little story. He's probably the greatest, the little miracle. That young man, he's such a gentleman, and he is such a good kid. And when he was 16, he was a little boy. He's always been super rambunctious. He's the kid that needs... he's got the ADHD for real, you know what I mean? And he was the kid that he was always going to get into something, and it was pretty crazy. But so we bought my first house, and I'm with my son, my oldest one, and we're eating dinner, and my son, my youngest one, runs over and grabs the pan off the stove, and he's eating out of the pan, right? That's my youngest. And my oldest looks at him, and he's like, what are you doing? You weren't raised in a barn. And my little 7-year-old son looks at him and goes, no, but I was born in a trailer. Just like that. It's a weird flex, but okay. And so I'll tell you this. I have a wonderful husband who does the exact same things that I do. He's sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's a beautiful member of AA. Through sponsorship, I have had to learn how to be a wife. And I didn't know that when God brought him into my life, I had no idea that what was going to transpire. You see, I didn't think I needed a man. That idea, you got to be whole within yourself. I was 8 years sober, right? I didn't have a man move in with me ever. And we started seeing each other, and we got married in Maui, and then we actually got married and didn't even live together until a year later. That's how that went, a little backwards, but I had no idea that God had a plan when he brought him into my life, that not only was he has added so much to my life, and I didn't even know that I needed that. Okay? And I'm not saying we're out here trying, we got to get a man. That's not what I'm saying. But my children have benefited greatly from him being in their life. And when my grown kids call and there's anything wrong, they know to call him. And I'm beyond blessed to have him in my life. And we keep God in the middle of our marriage. We pray together every single morning. I say the third step prayer. He says the seventh, and we go into our prayers every day. And because of that, we'll be celebrating 8 years of marriage, and I'm truly grateful for that. And I just want to say again, thank you guys so much for allowing me this opportunity to come and share my experience, strength, and hope. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.